Welcome to Bezel Chess, everyone. Today we are going to watch two games that were played in 2012 World Chess Championships, played between Viswanathan Anand and Boris Gelfand. Anand is a sitting world champion in 2012, and Boris Gelfand is a challenger who had won the candidates tournament in the previous cycle. So we are going to watch game 7 and 8, which are very important. What happened in these games is absolutely important in this tournament. So we are going to start with game 7. So Boris Gelfand is white and Viswanathan Anand is black. D4 by Boris Gelfand, D5 by black. So both players take control of the center. C4, we have the Queen's Gambit. C6, we have the Slav defense, declining the Gambit. Knight C3, and if black takes on C4, white would typically play A4, preventing B5, pawn B5 from happening. So instead, in the game, Anand plays knight F6, very typical. E3. So now white need not worry about this C4 pawn because the bishop is protecting the C4 pawn. But the downside is that the bishop is locked inside the pawn chain. But this is very much playable in the Slav defense. This white players play like this quite often in the Slav defense. Black played E6, Anand played E6. So now we enter the Semi-Slav territory. So it's a Semi-Slav when black's light square bishop is inside the pawn chain. It's called the Semi-Slav. And typically the positions that arise from Semi-Slav is very complicated, and sometimes it also leads to attacking chess. In the game, Gelfand plays knight F3. Anand played A6. So the idea behind A6 is if bishop D3, if white continues this as usual, Anand would like to play B5, and the pawn on C4 is under attack by two pawns, and if white pawn takes, black will take with the C pawn, and the whole point of this is to exchange the C pawn. So Gelfand does not allow this. He plays C5 and he gains space on the board. He gains space on the queen side, and this half of the board is black's territory, or basically Anand's territory. And by placing a pawn in the opponent's territory, Gelfand has gained some space. So that's good for Gelfand. And this pawn creates problems for the development of this bishop. So as long as this pawn is there, the dark square bishop for black remains very passive. So this instead, black immediately played C6. Black played knight BD7, developing the knight first. Then queen C2. A very typical square for the queen in the queen's gambit openings. Also, queen looks at the E4 square. And now black played B6. And typically, maybe many players, they would like to maintain this pawn chain, this beautiful pawn chain, of course, but one should not be too attached to this pawn chain because black will immediately play A5, and if you continue to maintain the pawn chain, white cannot take because of the pin that is happening on the A file. So this is a bad idea. So Gelfand took on B6, and that's the reason first knight D7 was played. Without knight D7, it would be queen takes, black would be forced to take with the queen, and of course if queen takes, it's like very dangerous. Queen takes, knight a4, knight gets a tempo on the queen, and knight and queen, they have a very good grip over c5 square. So this is good for white, and obviously in the world champion, maybe not winning, maybe not outright winning for white, but one wouldn't play like this in the world championship games. So in the game, it was knight takes, and now bishop d2, just getting some development. Pawn c5. So this is a backward pawn. So mind you that this is not an isolated pawn, because technically speaking there is a fellow pawn on the d file, but nevertheless it's a backward pawn. It cannot be at least in this position, it cannot be protected by any other black pawn, so it's as weak as an isolated pawn. So of course if this pawn moves up here, then the story is different, but right now the pawn is backward, and it's a weakness. So black tries to get rid of the weakness with c5, pawn c5. Anand plays c5, best move in the position. Now rook c1. So Gelfand ignores king side development. He's focused mostly on the queen side, because that's where he's going to get play in this game. He's going to play on the queen side, and when it comes to the king is fairly safe with all these pieces around, and also a fairly close center. The king actually is safe. Not for long. King will not be safe forever, but for now it's safe. And now black takes, and if black plays c5, which looks very good, to be honest, because black gets this beautiful pawn chain. The problem with this move is white immediately attacks this pawn chain, and if black takes, white, it's good for white, because white gets open lines on the queen side to attack. And since white is the one, white player is trying to play on the queen side, so white has better development on the queen side, white is in a better position to take advantage of the situation. So this so this was rejected. So black takes, and now how should white take capture? So I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video, think about it, and also think about the strategic implications. In the game, it was pawn takes d4, and this move came to me as a surprise when I was watching this game for the first time in 2016. It was surprising for me, because my rationale was that this d4 pawn is an isolated pawn. So I rejected this line. So I wanted to take with the knight, but as it turns out, this is a bad move. Taking with the knight, maybe if Gelfand had captured with the knight, maybe the game would just become a draw from this point onwards. So by taking with the knight instead of the pawn, white has less control in the center. Black has two pawn majority in the center, 2 versus 1. So this should be fairly equal, and of course white's bishop is not that good. So instead, white takes with the pawn, and although this is isolated pawn, this is a source of advantage here, because the pawn covers two very important squares, two very critical squares, e5 and c5, and also the bishop gets open diagonal now, and it's not your typical isolated pawn. The reason being, the d file is closed, so it's not very easy to attack the isolated pawn on the d file. So Anand cannot use his major pieces to just place on the d file and put a lot of pressure on the d4 isolated pawn. So that's the big difference between your typical isolated pawns and a more like in this position. Yeah, it's not as vulnerable as your typical isolated pawn. In the game, bishop d6. So the bishop finds a good diagonal, good bishop for black. Bishop g5. So very natural. Again, you might say, why would you move the same piece twice in the opening before even castling with the king? But of course, this is happening at the world championship level. Yeah, it's very well calculated, and even they violate the principles. When they violate the opening principles, they know what exactly they are doing, and they have good reasons to violate the principles. Of course, when you have a good reason, you can certainly violate some opening principles. Castles by black. Bishop d3 by white. So white has two good bishops. White's bishops are very good. They are controlling very good diagonals. And white is also ready to castle. h6. So I think if white takes, black is probably happy because the two bishops advantage for white is gone. So maintains the pin, and now bishop b7 by Anand. A passive bishop. It's quite passive to have this bishop here, but anyways, it's necessary to make sure. It's necessary move because we want the back rank connected. I mean, the major pieces to coordinate. So bishop has to move. In the game, white castles. So it's 15 moves. It's the 15th move, and you might say it's a little late, but the king was very safe and it was well calculated. Queen b8. So this is again a very interesting point, a very interesting juncture in this game. Actually, black allows white to double the pawns in front of the king. So this looks very attractive. But again, Gelfand did not go for this because if you think, if you do a little deeper analysis, it's not very easy to get an attack on the black king. It's not very easy to do it because most white's pieces, the white's position is designed to get play on the queen side, not on the king side. And yeah, this pawn especially also covers an important central square, so it's not a big problem. And if there's a check, of course, king can just go to the corner, and also eventually there's a threat to trap the bishop with f5. So bishop has to move back, and in fact, black might make use of g file in these positions. So for that reason, again, a masterful strategic decision by Gelfand. Bishop g3. Now he wants to exchange the bishops, and the reason for that is e5 and c5 squares are supposed to be weak and white has control over them, but the dark square bishop is controlling those two squares. If white pieces go there, black's bishop is going to remove it. So after trading the bishop, once the bishops get traded, these two squares are going to be more vulnerable. The dark squares are going to be more vulnerable, and white will be able to take advantage of it. So rook f c8. So placing the rook on the same file as white's queen, but black's pieces are a little too cramped on the queen side. They're not as efficient as white's pieces. White's pieces have a little more freedom. They are more free. So queen to e2 in the game. So it's not a very good, although there is no immediate threat, it's not a good idea to have your queen on the same file as your opponent's rook. There are always tactics. There are always tactics that arise from it. So queen e2, very safe move. In fact, the queen still remains active, and also pressure adds some more attackers to the a6 pawn, which is a weakness, which is, by the way, isolated, but yeah, isolated and weakness. It's a weak pawn here. Sorry. So bishop cross g3, and there is no reason to take away from the center here. Taking away from the center just to open up the rook's file is not really, it's not really good here. So it's better to take towards the center here. Also creates an escape square for the king. So again, might confuse some of you who are watching this. You typically you take towards the center unless you have a very good reason to take away from the center. So we take towards the center here, and Gelfand took towards the center. And now rook c2. So what is the idea behind rook c2? Think about it. I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video. Think about it for a couple of minutes. Okay, I hope you realized it, but this is to double the rooks on the c file. White is trying to double the rooks on the c file. Rook b8, again a modest move. Maybe the rook can be effective on the b file later. Knight a5, sorry, knight a4. Knight is going to see, in this position, the knight is going for c4 here, c5. Knight e4 was played in the game. And now, of course, you remove the knight, pawn takes, and you can't really take the pawn. You can't take the pawn because of the bishop. So instead, it was rook exchange first. And in this position, if all the rooks are traded, then a central pawn is going to fall. And this is winning for white because white's knights are just too good here. White's knights have access to c5 and e5. So in the game, it was not rook takes, but bishop takes. And now, of course, if white tries to win a pawn, it's d cross e4, again d cross e4 and queen cross e4, bishop b7. So the bishop gets active, really active on an open diagonal with the tempo on the queen. So one extra pawn, it's good for white, but maybe black has some compensation. So this line was rejected, and anyways this would give back some control. So even though white is not up a pawn, white is not even up a pawn, white would like to keep control here. So Gelfand just played queen c2, so doubling up on the c file. So pawn g5, so very ugly move to make, but what else did black have? This is a very difficult position for black. So it's very difficult for black to play anything. One idea is to play immediate e5 to get some counter play, but again weakens the position quite a bit. E5, so pawn e5 weakens the position. Black now has an isolated pawn. And yes, but black has two isolated pawns. Especially the d5 one is really weak now because it's on a semi-open file. So this is advantage for black. Sorry, advantage for white. So being desperate, black played g5. So this is a desperate move. Actually, it's not a great move to play at all. But in desperation, you try to play some complicated. You try to make things a little complicated. That's a good practical strategy. queen c2, queen infiltrates, and after the queen trade, the rook reaches the 7th rank. So the rook is pretty good on the 7th rank. It's a beautiful rook. This knight has great potential. This knight has good potential. The bishop is doing fine. Overall, the piece quality for white's pieces are vastly superior compared to black's pieces. So in the game, one second. In the game, it was f6, just playing a little defensive. So bishop takes the knight. So only good piece for black is off the board. So that's a good move. And knight immediately attacks the doubled pawns. So black has to play f5. And now again e5 and c5 are a huge weakness. And you'll see how these two squares are exploited to eventually win this game. So in the game, it's knight c4. So no hurry. There is no white is in no hurry to put pieces on these two squares, because for now the knight is covering these squares anyways. So you need not be in a hurry to put your pieces into the weak squares. You might have to wait for the correct moment sometimes. So first knight f6. Okay, knight has moved. Anand had no other ways to make progress this position. Otherwise, if the knight doesn't move, the bishop is stuck defending the knight. So knight has to move. Knight c4. At last, the knight reaches c4 square. Black's knight reaches the d5 square. So black's knight actually finds a good square. Rook attacks the pawn, and the knight goes to b4. Give some protection to a6 pawn, and also the knight has ideas to maybe take this, maybe go here, offering a trade of pieces, or maybe if it's necessary, the knight can go to c2, and knight has a few interesting options here. So in the game, Gelfand ignored the pawn completely. He's more than happy to sacrifice some material here. So knight goes to c2, and now knight goes to c6. So beautiful knights by Gelfand. Attacks the rook. Rook takes the pawn, but this was the idea. Now the bishop is trapped. So Gelfand traps this bishop, and now after a check, now imagine if there was if we had captured away from the center, the king would have been, we would be forced to play king to f2, and this pawn would move up with a check. And because we have captured towards the center, the king has a safe square on h2. Now e3. So pawn looks dangerous, but Gelfand ignores this. He gives a check. King moves to h7. He gives a check on c7, and the king has to go to h8. Again, the king has to go back, because if the king moves up, it's a disaster. It's a forced mate in 2 moves. The king could move out, but okay, if the king moves to f6, it's rook f7 checkmate. And if king h5, it's very difficult. Knight cross e6, and okay, if black just tries to get a promotion, we are very close to checkmate. Knight g7 checkmate, with the help of 2 knights and the pawn. So king moves back. King h8. And now Anand's knights are approaching the black king. And with the 2 strong knights and the rook, a dominating rook on the 7th rank, it doesn't matter here. And now black can actually, okay, if you make a queen directly, it's simple checkmate in 2. It does not help. So in the game, It was in the game. By the way, it was a resignation. Here, uh, Black did not want to continue this any further. But of course, there's a way to make a queen with a check. You can make a full queen with a check. King again goes back to safety, and there's no good ways to defend this position. Checkmate in 2 is coming, so in order to avoid that, you have to sacrifice the queen, and this is a hopeless position for white. This is the hopeless position for Black. So Black had to resign. Anand resigned, and the world champion was trailing after the 7th round. And after the 7th round, there were only 5 more rounds for classical chess. Anand had only 5 more games to recover. But yeah, let's see what happened in game 8. So right now, to give you context, Gelfand is leading. If all the other games end in a draw, Gelfand becomes the new world champion. So let's see game 8. Game 8 is it's famous because it's the shortest game ever played in the world championship games. So it's the shortest game. That's the record. And because because Anand played Black in the previous round, this round he gets white. And in this game, Anand is playing white, and Boris Gelfand is playing Black. D4 by white. So Anand plays d4, knight f6, c4, g6. So we need to appreciate Gelfand. He did not play any passive openings just because he wanted a draw. He just wanted a draw, but he did not play passive openings. He is playing complications. Maybe this goes into King's Indian. Maybe it can go into Grunfeld defense. In the game, very interesting move, f3. This is called the anti-Grunfeld anti-Grunfeld move. The reason being, if you play the most natural move here, natural looking move, knight c3 in this position, idea is to play e4, and of course if Black plays bishop g7, we play e4, d6, we enter King's Indian defense. But the Grunfeld is d5. White constructs this big center, but the knights get traded. So the c3 knight got traded for the f6 knight. On the other hand, if you play f3, like the anti-Grunfeld, of course, if they play bishop g7, you play e4, and we enter the King's Indian defense, same-ish variation. But if, of course, in this position, if they try for Grunfeld, you need not play knight c3, you play e4, and the point is you have avoided the knight trade here. White has avoided the knight trade, and it's generally considered good for white. It's playable for Black, but white has comfortable positions usually here. As usual, Black gets a lot of attack on the d4 square. In the Grunfeld, Black gets a lot of pressure on the d4 pawn, but white can actually castle on the opposite sides, and then now rook also joins the protection for d4, and there's typical h4 h5 attack on the Black king. So if Black king has defensive resources, but it's very scary. So in the game, this wasn't played. So Grunfeld is possible, but c5 was played. And if you take, it's not very difficult to recover this pawn. It's actually very easy. In fact, if Black is really worried about the pawn, Black can very quickly play queen h5 check, bishop d7, and although queen is moving multiple times, Black has recovered the pawn. Material is equal. So the best way to push for an advantage here is to play d5 and gain space in the center. And now d6, now e4. Black plays bishop g7. So white has this brilliant center, big pawn chain, but white completely lacks minor piece development. On the other hand, black has lead in development, and also black's king is ready to castle. So this is how modern defenses are played. So you allow white to construct a big center, but in doing so, white lacks development, and black primarily a modern defense player, a player who's playing a modern defense, is primarily focusing on developing pieces first. So this is fine. And now knight e2. And now in very interesting move, knight c3. So Anand shifts his king knight to the queen side. And this is not a random decision. It has a very important reasoning behind it. So imagine instead if you play knight c3 here, e6 is very common, attacking white center. And if white takes, white is giving up the lead central pawn, which is gaining space. If white takes, the pawn which is giving you space advantage is gone. So yeah, white typically does not take. And you just develop, and the problem is, where will this knight go? So this knight does not stand very well. And if it goes here, eventually the knight has to move to g3 because the bishop has to develop, but it will face pawn h5, h4, so on. So this variation is rejected, and Anand shifts his king's knight to the queen side. So the point being, if e6 is played, the knight can go to d2, and if white takes and rook here, knight goes to c5. So instead of having the knight on g3, you have a knight on c4. Superior knight targets the backward pawn. So in the game, of course, e6 wasn't played. Knight h5 was played. So this was the new move back in 2012. And knight moves out of the way. It feels very weird, but okay. For a King's Indian player, they are trying to play e5, f5. So the knight just moves out of the way in this position. Bishop g5. And now a surprising move, bishop f6. So exchanging the dark square bishops. And bishop takes bishop. And a safer move is just knight takes. Although allows this attack, this typical h4, h5 attack, black is fine. It's a much more safer way to play. And you would expect Gelfand to play safe here, because if you remember, he won the previous round, game 7. So he's leading. So a draw is actually good for black. But kudos to him. He played very active. Maybe he wanted to win this as well, and he wanted to seal the deal, almost seal the deal. So he takes with the pawn. He doubles his pawns, but the idea is very clear. He wants to play f5 later. Queen d2. So queen just looks at these dark squares. Good move. f5 as planned. White takes. Bishop takes. And now a double attack. A pawn attacks the bishop and knight at the same time. But this does not win white any material. Think about it. Feel free to pause the video and try to understand why white is not winning any material. I'll give you a few seconds. Yeah, obviously, if the bishop will take the knight, and if we take the knight, bishop will be saved. And if we take the bishop, knight will be saved. This way, they get out of the double attack. It's not a problem. But black has an in-between move. Rook e8 check was played, and as it turned out, this was not the best. The best here was queen h4 check, and the reason being, once the king moves, you trade off the bishop for the knight, and then you go back. And in this case, there is no typical h4 h5 idea to attack the king. The queen stands perfectly well on h5 square, so it does not allow white to get this attack. Instead, it was rook e8. In the game, it was rook e8 check, and Anand did not bother blocking it, because anyways the king is not going to castle in this game. King goes to d1, and now bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop. Otherwise the pawn structure is not desirable. This is not a desirable pawn structure for white. So in the game, rook takes bishop, and now black should just go back, and although allows h4, black has a good chance to hold on to this position. But Gelfand overlooked something very important. He played queen f6, and his idea, he's threatening to take on f3 and get a double attack like this. So attacking the king, attacking the rook at the same time. So maybe he expects, maybe in his mind, he says that, okay, Anand will probably just defend the pawn on f3, and then instead of going back with the knight to a defensive post, the knight can go to f4. So in this case, black is even better. There is no doubt about it. But something else happened. Anand ignores the threat. He takes the knight. Queen takes pawn. King moves. So in order to recover the lost material, black has to take the rook. Seems like black is up material, because black got a rook for a knight. But after queen f2, it's only 17. This was the 17th move, and Gelfand resigns the game. It was resignation. Try to think about it. Why was this? Why did Gelfand resign? Obviously, he's one of the best players in the world. He's not going to resign. He will not resign unless he has a good reason for it. The reason is potentially the queen is getting trapped here. So what would happen if you just continue with the development? Think about it. You can pause the game for a few seconds and see how you can trap the queen. Okay, it's bishop d3. So the queen is trapped. Queen has no safe squares. All these squares are covered. Bishop covers this. Queen covers this. Queen also covers the pawn and these squares, and the rook covers the remaining squares. So the best, queen has to sacrifice itself for the rook, and now white is up. White has a queen here, so white is up a lot of material. There is a way to queen, however. There is a very good. There's a very interesting move. It's queen. It's rook. Knight c6, sacrificing the knight. And the point is, if you again do the same here with bishop d3, knight check, an in between move. So you don't have. It's a check, so you have to respond. Of course, if you take the knight with the queen, like, it's quite horrible. So king moves, and then the queen comes back safely, and now black wins. But of course, white would just take here instead of trying to trap the queen. White will just take, and queen takes, and the resulting imbalance would be two minor pieces for a rook and a lot of weaknesses. So this is worth resigning. This is completely winning for white. So Gelfand resigned only after 17 moves. Once queen f2 was played, Gelfand resigned, and it was only a win after just 17 moves. And after the 8th round, it's again back to equal, 4 points versus 4 points. And the remaining games in the classical in the classical rounds became draws, and the game went on to tie breaks, and Anand managed to win in tie breaks. So this way, Anand showed great resilience, psychological strength, and he held his title in 2012. Thanks for watching.